everyone, or a lot of people, have been so forthcoming about their families and their multi-generational uh, experience that I thought I would say something about mine. So, all four of my grandparents were Jewish immigrants from either Austria or Poland, or what's now Ukraine. They came in the 1880s and 1890s. One of my grandfathers tried to settle in Kentucky, where his older brother had already gone, and ended up going back to the Northeast. So they settled in New Jersey and New York. Um, my parents were both deaf from childhood. My father had 25% hearing in one ear, so he could hear a little bit with a hearing aid in that ear. A lot of fights over speak louder, Mel. But he was great in his way and did the best he could. My mother had no hearing. Neither of them were sign language speakers, because many children who were deaf were deprived of the opportunity to learn sign language in that era, and some still are. My mother was a lip reader, which is a very imperfect form of communication. Um, I had a younger brother who my parents were always asking me to take care of and help, because I knew more about the world than they did. I did not do a very good job of that, and it was not good for either my brother or me to have that burden. My brother was a problem child, was a high school dropout, and I was made somewhere between 5 and 10 times as much money as I have in his life as an extremely successful Hollywood writer, and he's still going strong. And his whole family is in the industry, and very successful. The industry is, Hollywood. So I was the egghead. I was the successful brother until my father saw my brother's name on the silver screen for the first time, and that was pretty much the end of my success. uh, um, so let's see. I married in my early 20s. Did the Africa thing with my wife. By the way, my wife was Marjorie Shostak, who wrote a classic about the life of an African woman called Nisa, the life and words of a Kong woman. I commend it to anyone who wants to really have an encounter with a person from a different society. One publisher, it was eventually published by Harvard Press, but one publisher rejected it because she sounded too much like women here. They wanted her to sound a lot more exotic. Well, her whole life was exotic, but her feelings were not exotic. Her feelings were, like what you could hear on Oprah. And so we had, after our adventures, we had 3 children together. Marjorie passed away after an 8-year struggle with breast cancer. She died when she was diagnosed, she was still breastfeeding our youngest. The breast was full of milk when it was cut off. The weaning was very abrupt, and she was doing the Bushman nursing thing, and so that was considered early in our family for weaning. In any case, she lost her battle with cancer in 1996 when my oldest daughter was just past her 18th birthday. My son was 14, my younger daughter was 9. And so I can say that I was a really great dad. Then when I became a mom, I was a pretty good mom. And I can tell you that it's a lot harder to be a pretty good mom than it is to be a great dad. at least by the usual standards. I happily remarried in 2005, and I suffered from depressions in my youth. So did my mother, so did my son, and I have been treated with various methods, including psychotherapy, and I am in fantastically good shape right now. I haven't been depressed in years, and I love my life, and all that stress, sort of starting at the beginning. I don't know why am I not crippled? The answer is that humans are resilient, and we are resilient to different degrees. And I've had a lot of luck in my life. I accept that, but sometimes I think people in the helping professions do underestimate potential for recovery and resilience. Not that I had the worst childhood or the worst life, not by a long stretch. I don't consider any of it traumatic, except maybe Marjorie's illness and death. And life goes on, and so that's the family story, and I'm sure you could tell me a lot of interesting things about what it means. But I want to move on to the topic of the day, which is the world story and the political story, kind of. Although I'm not going to get political in the sense that we see on television every day. And it's a huge relief for me to not have a television in my room. I got to tell you, my wife is addicted to. She's great, I love her, but she's addicted to the news now, and she gets nothing but grief from it. And I don't want to hear about it anymore. There's an old saying that a conservative is a liberal who is ambushed by life, and people do become more conservative as they get older. But I like to say that I am a pessimist who is ambushed by progress. So I was, like I say, depressed a lot, and also pessimistic intellectually, maybe not just because of my depression. I was fighting for certain things like integration and against the war in Vietnam and for women's rights and second wave feminism. I spent a lot of time in the 60s and 70s doing those things. I was at the I Have a Dream speech 2 days before my 17th birthday, in defiance of my parents' express instructions that I was not to go. I got on a bus in the middle of the night and went to Washington, one of the great memories of my life, of course. But if you had told me that day that I would live to see an African American president, I would have said, "What are you smoking?" And you probably would have been smoking something, because that's what happened at big demonstrations in that era. But I never expected the things that I was working for and fighting for in those days to come so fast. Within a few years of that time, we had the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We had Medicare and Medicaid passed by a Texan president who fought like the devil. In retrospect, I was out there in the street saying, hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? But in retrospect, you see not that his legacy in the domestic scene was amazing, and what else? To turn on the news and see colored faces and black faces and women you know, I always say to to people, if you think nothing's changed, you're not as old as I am. And you know, turn on a serious news program, and you see everybody is female. The interviewer, the three experts that are arguing with each other from it, that may not surprise some of the younger people here, but it sure still surprises me. Uh, and of course, women in positions of power have become not only accepted but steadily more and more numerous. Now, don't think I'm naive about this. I know that there's a lot more to be done. I know that worldwide there's a tremendous amount of violence against women, sexual exploitation, trafficking, oppression that Peggy Chan talked about, for instance, yesterday, goes on in so many places. You're also deprived of education and on and on and on. And also, you know, there are 21 women in the Senate now. That's only about 1/5, but last year it was 20. In 1985 it was 2. And I see that as a relentless trend. And that's part of what my book's about. Okay, also internationally, and I see there's setbacks now, but internationally, the end of apartheid, the end of communism, the end of the Cold War. You know, people talk about nuclear proliferation. If you're as old as I am, you remember hiding under the desks in the elementary school classroom and thinking this could happen any minute, and that would be the end of everything. In fact, we never took seriously the idea that we could survive a nuclear attack. Even when we were 10, we had a joke about what do you do when there's a nuclear war coming, and the answer is and we had these fixed iron leg desks bolted to the floor. You go under the desk and curl up, put your head between your legs, and kiss your ass goodbye. That was what the 10-year-olds thought of the school drills in preparation for the war. Anyhow, so that's what I want to say about my experience with pessimism. And I'm looking at a world situation that is a lot less worrisome than the ones. I was born in 1946, so just the one that existed just before that, during the 5 years before that, far worse than any situation we're likely to face, in my opinion. The Cold War, also more dangerous and worse. The tenor of some aspects of political life, also much worse. So if you think things haven't improved, you're not as old as I am. But now I want to go back to, so this was that time during World War II, a terrible time in which horrendous things happened. One of which is this episode in a town in Poland called Wiedwabne, and that was a town. Very short book, very, very disturbing, but if you want to find out about this, all the Jewish inhabitants, 1,500 Jewish inhabitants of this town were burned to death in a barn where they had been confined by their Polish, non-Jewish neighbors. That's what the book is called, Neighbors. And the historians, two historians have now written books about this, and both have concluded and demonstrated that Germans were not involved in this, that there was not a German, military unit supervising or instructing this. This was a spontaneous action by ordinary Poles in this ordinary town. However, in a different town, in France, in the south of France, there was the opposite story. So this is the Chambon, where a pastor named Trocmé and his wife uh, saved thousands of Jews over the course of the war. They were Huguenots. They were very independent-minded, but they also decided they had to do this no matter what. And they were arrested several times. Their lives were in danger all the time. But they led the whole town in this process, and everybody in the town signed on to take these huge risks to save these people from the Nazis. But where does that come from? I mean, I told you yesterday where the things like the Ed Wagner episode might come from, but now I want to understand why. I want you to understand why my knowledge of behavioral biology and evolution does not make me pessimistic about the future of the world, even with all the things that I know. So, why did altruism and cooperation evolve? This is a chart that I expect you to memorize by the end of the day. Not. So it's just the way I like to have my students look at things. There are many levels of causation and behavior when you ask a question like, why did this altruistic act in Le Chambon happen? Or why did the horrific act in Ed Wagner happen? And I start out, first of all, this is a line between the organism and the world. This is the behavioral output. I start out with phylogeny, which is the background in long-term evolution, natural selection, the forces operating on the genome, the developmental process, physiology, so hormones and brain function, and all these tremendously important environmental effects that also play a big role. And students don't pass my courses unless they can keep in mind all the levels of explanation. And I always say the purpose of college education is to increase your tolerance for ambiguity. And you have to be an intelligent person. You have to be able to hold two ideas in your head at once, which may seem contradictory to some people. And in this case, the two big ideas are evolution and biology are very powerful. Environment during life, individual life, is very powerful, and with all the things that those stand for. So I won't repeat this, except to remind you of what the state of thinking about evolution was among intellectuals in the late 19th century. And then along came this guy, Peter Kropotkin, a Russian evolutionary thinker, who wrote a book called, Mutual Aid, a Factor of Evolution. The mutual aid tendency in man has so remote an origin and is so deeply interwoven with all the past evolution of the human race that it's been maintained up to the present time, notwithstanding all the vicissitudes of history. So he emphasized the evolution of cooperation, not the evolution of competition, and he was the first theorist to do that. This is a famous book, half a century or so later than Kropotkin, Animal Dispersion in Relation to Social Behavior, and that the evolutionist Wynne Edwards, who put forward in a big articulation of the concept of group selection. That is, groups, not just individuals, compete with each other. Groups compete with each other, and successful groups are ones that cooperate and are altruistic within themselves. And that became an important concept, but it also became a source of controversy. This is W.D. Hamilton, a very influential British evolutionary theorist who came up with the idea of kin selection. And this idea was that the unit is not just the individual and not the whole group, but the kinship lineage, and that and he did mathematical calculations showing why you should be helping your relatives more than others. And an earlier biologist named Haldane, famously said, theoretically, I should be willing to sacrifice myself for one identical twin, for two siblings, for four half siblings, for 8 first cousins, and like that. And I won't tell you the theory behind that, but that is a very influential, to this day, a very influential concept in why and where we see altruistic behavior in animals. And this is George C. Williams, who is one of the great theorists of the modern era in evolution, and who was a very vigorous proponent of individual selection and kin selection, but not group selection. Likewise, Richard Dawkins is tremendously influential in book, and if you haven't read it, it's highly readable, and it has a lot to teach about evolution, how evolution works. And the idea of the selfish gene is that the gene is the unit of selection, even below the level of the individual. And that actually makes a lot of sense. I don't have time to go into it, but it doesn't prevent altruism and different kinds of altruism from evolving. So this is another famous influential paper by Robert Trivers called The Evolution of Reciprocal Altruism, and it added to the concept of kin selection the idea that if you have a relatively long-lived species that has a memory for altruistic acts, you could have selection could favor reciprocity. That is, not just cooperation in the moment, which was sort of easier to understand, but if you could do something for someone and not expect the aid returned to you immediately, but could wait and see what happens and amortize it over time, then you could have evolution evolving. You could have altruism evolving between non-relatives, and it's obviously something that we see in nature. And this is one of the books authored or co-authored by David Sloan Wilson, who has been Jerry. You're still here, right? Jerry works with Miller, works with David. David has been the most forceful and vigorous proponent of the idea of group selection. It goes back to Kropotkin and comes through Wynne Edwards into the present day with David Sloan Wilson, and he talks a lot about levels of selection, multi-level selection, so that he accepts that there's gene-level selection and individual-level selection, but he stresses group selection more than a lot of people do. And Francois, my colleague at Emory, many of you have heard of, maybe seen or read, he is someone who stresses altruism and empathy as being pervasive in nature, and he talks a lot about altruism in animals. He and I had a little debate once, I guess, at Emory, or I was asked to comment on a presentation he gave, and during the presentation he said, I don't see why all these people in sociobiology are so interested in violence. Violence is actually quite rare in animal behavior. What you see most of the time is reconciliation and conflict that flares up a little bit and doesn't get to the level of violence. And I mean, he's absolutely right about that. So he's saying, he was trying to make the point that there's something weird about the people who focus on violence so much. And what I said in my commentary, there's something weird about the volcano experts who only focus on eruption, because 99.99% of the time volcanoes are not erupting. They bubble up a little bit, they go down, quiescent there. You know, you sit there for a long time before you see an eruption. But for some reason, these geologists are obsessed with the eruption, and they want to figure out how to predict it and prevent it. So, at any rate, the other Wilson, E.O. Wilson, in this paper with Martin Nowak and Carmen Tarnita, picked up very strongly the banner of group selection, and Ed Wilson said to me one day at dinner, Mel, kin selection is dead. Now, that's what they said in this paper, but it turns out that a very large number of experts on evolutionary process and theory did not agree with them and signed a letter to that effect. I underlined some of the more famous names here. So this is an ongoing controversy, but I can tell you for sure that kin selection is not dead. And here's a better way, I think, to think about the evolution of cooperation. You have at least 5 different ways of getting it. You have kin selection, you have direct reciprocity, which is what Trivers introduced. You have indirect reciprocity, which is very common in ethnographic studies and anthropological analyses and economic system, and in which gift giving is the basis, but you don't necessarily expect to give back from the same person, and there's a flow of goods in the society. Network reciprocity is sort of a higher level of that, and group selection is competition between groups that favors altruism within groups, according to theory. So now I want to get down to the basic emotions of positive emotion of love and liking and things like it. No love in reptiles that I can find. With the early mammals in the evolution of the Paleo-mammalian brain, you have the first relationships and the first thing that you might want to call love between mother and offspring. And so this summarizes the things that changed with the earliest mammals. How do I know this? Because if you look at the platypus and other egg-laying mammals, they have all these things too. That is, and that suggested strongly that the common ancestor 200 plus million years ago had learning and play and family and the separation call and limbic system expansion. So here's an artist's depiction of one of the early mammals with a nest of young and a reptile that could really enjoy making a meal out of those babies. So what's going on here? The babies are doing the separation call, which is universal in mammals, and those of you who've had children know it well. Differs from species to species, but the main point of it is to be annoying, and it's annoying to parents in all species. So that actually the evolution of the middle ear goes with this, because this mammal can hear the high-pitched sounds of the separation call, and this reptile predator cannot hear them. So that's a very cool system by which, or process by which, the first relationships evolve. So fathers, as far as we know, were a much later invention, but I'll say a little bit about them. And about 100 million years later, there are fossils showing mammals on the path to placentation, which is, instead of being egg-laying, they were gestating internally. And in some species, probably fathers were around. That's fatherhood has evolved in many parts of the animal kingdom. The seahorse male famously has eggs laid in his pouch, and he gestates the eggs in his pouch, in effect in his body, even though they're laid by the female. the penguin, the emperor penguin, is one of the most devoted and famous fathers in the animal world. The marmosets here. That's a father carrying marmoset twins, as I mentioned yesterday. That father carries these twins together about 20% of his body weight all the time and hands them to the mother to nurse. And that's a human father. Um, what feeling? How does it go, Victoria? Like he's been rode hard and put away wet. That's the a Texas expression that I learned this morning. Uh, um, and so primates intensify the parenting process in one way and another compared to other mammals. It's prolonged, and it's very intimate. And I think we're going to hear more about this later, but just say that Bowlby's theory of attachment had a big influence on me and my decision to go study infants among the Kong. And Bowlby conceived this in a Freudian era, and he recast the whole idea of attachment as in effect, an independent instinct, not something that happens because the baby is nursed and learns to love the source of the milk. It was shown in various ways that that's not how it works. But that there is something instinctual about attachment that's very deep, and that emerges in human infants around 7 or 8 or 9 months of age. And there has been a lot of research now on attachment in hunter-gatherers, including mine, among the Kong. And the other thing to know is that Harry Harlow and Conrad Lawrence, the German ethologist, both had the idea of affectional systems, was the term that Harlow used, and that there are overlapping capabilities in the brain for different kinds of relationships, but they're not. You can't say that all, as Freud liked to say, that all relationships are derived from the mother-offspring relationship, because they have some of the same circuits. They are independent in important ways, and behaviorally they're different. Okay, so how does the brain generate this love thing? And now we're up here in the short-term or longer-term physiology part of the chart, and this is just a depiction of activation of brain centers when someone is in love, and so just to say that there are a lot of ongoing studies of brain imaging studies of how mothers feel when they hear their babies cry, and how young couples feel, male and female, what happens in their brains during the first 3 months that they've been in love. And people who study this define the time frame very strictly. They don't want couples that are doing fine, thank you, but 6 months out. If you can imagine what they're trying to capture, it's that, but I think the long-term attachment is also very interesting. But so McLean's trained brain, getting this kind of emotion here for the first time, and attachment for the first time. And in the mammalian brain, there are certain universals. You can define the maternal behavior circuits, and they overlap, not the same as, but they overlap with the circuits for other types of attachment and relationships. One of the things that happened in evolution is there's an evolutionary change from this one hormone, which vasotocin, which is involved, for example, in the nesting behavior of turtles and other reptiles. And say that this is a type of Bowen differentiation that occurred in evolution. Maybe this is evolving by one amino acid change into two different hormones that are very important, both in the body and in the brain. Oxytocin is one I'm going to be talking about, and I'm sure you've heard about it. It's a hormone that causes milk letdown. It's a hormone that causes uterine contractions during birth, and orgasm is yeah, I just got distracted because I had a big fight with my editors at the Wall Street Journal, who I write a regular column for them. The orgasm was one of the words they wouldn't let me use in a column about sexual disorders and their treatment. So anyway, oxytocin is also a neurotransmitter inside the brain, and it's very important in regulating maternal behavior and other relationships. Looks like that. I said it delivers milk, so it's been part of the reproductive system since the beginning of mammals. And it's also in the brain as part of a system that makes maternal behavior rewarding, because oxytocin neurons synapse on dopamine neurons, which release dopamine in the brain's reward center, the nucleus accumbens, and that's why as parents we do the stuff that looks crazy to people who haven't yet been parents, and it's just set up to be a deeply rewarding experience to give and give and give and give until you've been rode hard and put away wet. And so I certainly did my share, and I can say that there are a certain amount of reciprocal rewards coming back to me. And I didn't mention that Sunday Marjorie's mother, their grandmother, passed away, and very peacefully at age 102. She lived to exactly twice the age that her daughter lived till, and my three children, grown children, at the graveside made me insanely proud. So with what they said and how they said it, so it was worth it. I mentioned yesterday that their pair bonding is extremely common in birds, less common in mammals, but it tends to go with fathering, and in both birds and mammals. And there have been classic studies now comparing the brains and behavior of prairie voles and montane voles, and this is I highlighted the letters because that makes it easier for me to remember, but in behavior, prairie voles are pair bonding and parental, including paternal, whereas montane voles are multiple mating and only maternal. And they have different distribution of both oxytocin and vasopressin receptors in their brains. And that is a relatively recent evolutionary divergence with a small genetic change in the oxytocin receptor, or a small genetic change in the vasopressin receptor that makes it expressed in different cells and circuits of the brain, and determines whether you are a species with fathering or not. And you can introduce that genetic change into animals that are not supposed to be good fathers and get something like paternal behavior and pair bonding. I told you the bad news about chimpanzees yesterday. So no, and I said they're our closest relative, and we do share something like 98 or even 99% of our genome with them. And so that's the bad news. And you will hear, I was talking to somebody last night about Richard Wrangham, who's a chimp expert at Harvard. And I was on a radio show with him last year, and all he talked about was chimpanzees. And the interviewer was interested in, there was some new mass killing at the time, Where does this come from? And Richard was saying, well, look at our closest relative, the chimpanzees, and I kept saying, but, and here's what I tried to say after the but. The bonobos are a different species of ape. They were confused with chimps for a long time. They have a completely different type of social behavior, including they are highly social and have very complex behavior, tremendous learning ability, but very low, relatively low levels of aggression, face-to-face sex for whatever that's worth, female coalitions, and that are based in part on female sexual contacts, and female genital rubbing is what you're seeing in the bottom picture, and that goes with what seem like sounds of joy and excitement, and definitely it's been shown to be involved in the creation of female coalitions. It is hard to underestimate the. I mean, it's easy to underestimate. It's hard to overestimate the importance of this. Female coalitions are what keep a lid on male aggression and enable females in bonobos to be dominant over males. And that's a very important principle, which might turn out to be very important for humans in the long run. It's been not necessarily dominant over males, but keeping a lid on male aggression through increasingly influential female coalitions. Now, as I said, they're equally related to us as the chimpanzees are, and as of 2012, we have all three genomes sequenced, and now people are trying a longer process of trying to figure out what it is that makes the chimps and bonobos so different from each other, and what they share with us, and what they don't. But even in the first publication, we showed that 1.6% of the human genome is more closely related to the bonobo genome than the chimpanzee genome, and that 1.7% of the human genome is more closely related to the chimpanzee than to the bonobo genome. Now, we don't know yet what's in those genes or how they influence behavior, but that is a really exciting frontier of science to me, because that is going to reveal a lot about the genetic basis of aggression and cooperation. And we have a search going on at Emory for science. It's actually a diversity search, and I'm on the committee, and we had this great guy, John Lindo, who's the son of Colombian immigrants who grew up in a poor neighborhood in New York and became this genius DNA guy. And one of his projects is that he's going into now. He's sort of rewritten the history of Native American settlement of North America, and with DNA and ancient DNA studies. And now he's going into dog DNA as a sideline. And his idea is to take the tremendous behavioral differences in dog breeds and figure out what genes, make Cocker Spaniels wonderful pets, and Chihuahuas yippy, and German Shepherds and Rottweilers good dogs for protection and attack. So that's going to be a very exciting thing, as well as figuring out, I'd ask you to remember when somebody says our closest relative is, you'd say, there are two. They're exactly equally related to us genetically, and they're really different from each other in certain important ways. And this is just one of now thousands of studies of oxytocin in various contexts. So positive versus negative emotional information is processed differently, and you have a spray bottle with oxytocin in it, and inject it, spray it intranasally like you do when you have a cold, and some of it will get into the brain. You can't swallow oxytocin and get it into the brain, but you can get some of it into the brain that way. And so there are lots and lots of studies of that now, and many studies showing that it enhances the processing of positive versus negative information. This is an experiment on trust that shows that oxytocin increases trust, and it does that in many different kinds of economic games and questionnaires and other situations. So oxytocin is a big deal in promoting love, attachment, relationships, trust, and positive emotions toward others. And since since I went into such detail about the way the brain yesterday about the way the brain generates aggression, and went to the trouble of trying to convince you that it's really deep in our brains. Now I want you to understand that love is equally deep in our brains, and there's increasing understanding all the time of what the mechanisms of that are. So how did we live for most of our history? That is yours truly in much better days, practicing the well-known anthropological method of participant interference, and that is a group of Kong or Junklasi men who are, by the way, Junklasi means the real people. That's what they call themselves, like many people in the world do in their own language. So they definitely have a sense of superiority to non-Kong. In fact, they have a sense of superiority to people over in the next village. And in case you've been in the academic world, that's not going to be terribly surprising to you. I'm going to go quickly because Dr. Bowen did such a beautiful job of summarizing their situation and who they are yesterday. And these are pictures of hunting and gathering, which provides 70% of the diet. But the average for hunter-gatherers across the board, and I've been involved I'm considered one of the founders of the paleo diet, which is a bunch of different fads on the internet now that you shouldn't take very seriously. But if you look at the hunter-gatherer diets across the board, they are about 50% flesh, including quite a bit of fish on average, and not for the bushmen, but if they're in a desert. But 50% flesh and 50% plants is a good way to think about the basic human diet. And just for the record, I now tell people it's a big range, and I now tell people what they shouldn't eat rather than what they should eat. And the things that are not in hunter-gatherer diets are refined carbohydrates, high levels of salt, low levels of fiber. In other words, if you have a normal American diet, you want to have more fiber, less salt, much less refined carbohydrates, and probably less saturated fat. And the rest is, well, anything from vegan to an all-meat diet, which I've met some people with the paleo flag flying over their heads, one woman in good health, 62 years old, told me I said, how much carbohydrate do you take in a day? And it's total carbohydrates. She said, I can't tolerate more than 30 grams. And, so there are extremes of human diet, which I wouldn't go to, but there's a big range of what's compatible with health and there's a big range in the hunting and gathering literature and the era. So just pictures of village life that transcends this most important religious ritual and healing ritual, and men go into deep trance. Take my word for it, and they they are able to lay on hands and according to the belief system, cure people of their ills. It's so good for you if you're not sick too. I mean, it's like kind of like vitamins. It'll cure what ails you. And I this is very important. The older anthropological literature doesn't give you, and maybe you'll disagree with me, Dr. Bowen, but it doesn't give you a real sense of the quality and importance of relationships in a lot of societies because people are busy documenting customs and practices, and in every human society, those relationships that you see in your offices are I guarantee you going to be familiar to you. You see the dyads, you'll see the triangles, you'll see the multi-generational family influences, especially in a setting like this where the multi-generational family is there together. I visited in 2005, and I'm still kicking myself for not photographing them, but there were 5 generations of women and girls in one line in this village, and at any rate, if you want to know what people are anxious about in this culture, I mean, everybody thinks, oh well, the lions, hyenas, drought. Yeah, they're anxious about those things, but I'd say the principal thing they're anxious about is relationships, because their life depends on relationships, and because they are that complex web of reciprocity is their equivalent of a bank account and life insurance and retirement funds all put together. And if they have a falling out with their sister or husband or cousin or child, there's a lot at stake. A lot of these photographs most of these photographs are taken by Marjorie Shostak, and you see tremendous amount of individuality. It's another thing you don't get very much from the older ethnographies. There is many different kinds of personalities in a small-scale hunter-gatherer society as there are in a society like ours, and I dare say there are a lot more differences among the people you're looking at than there are in this room, because the convergence of us in this room ensures that we are a small sample and very similar in many ways of our whole American population. So there's tremendous variation in personality. We heard a lot about women yesterday. I want to pursue that further because women have, let me back up. There's a consensus that that gender egalitarianism is higher in hunter-gatherers than in any other type of human society. Dr. Bowen gave you basically the Stewart cultural evolution map with horticultural, agricultural societies and then industrial. And if you do cross-cultural comparisons with hundreds of societies, you find that gender equality is greater in hunter-gatherers. Is it perfect? No. So, but I'll tell you now a little bit more about how it works and why. Women have a voice. This is Nisa in 2005. She was the subject of Marjorie's 1981 book that I mentioned. Still going strong, still holding forth and talking to people. And sitting around the fire at night, and there have been great studies of this, especially by Holly Wiesner. Women participate in the conversations. They are not excluded, and they are contributing about 1/3 of the comments. So why is it that in so many other kinds of societies, let's see what I have next, so many other kinds of societies you have all male groups making decisions, but not in hunter-gatherers. And my answer is the groups are too small, the population density is too low. You can't, if you're a man with a sexist ideology, of which there are a lot in among the Kung, they certainly will say disdainful things about women, but they can't get women out of their face. They are there. They are saying things. They are showing that they know stuff. They're bringing back information that from their gathering trips that's important for the hunters. They are contributing good ideas about everything from whether some young couple should be allowed to get divorced, or to whether the band should move to a different water source, and everything in between. And they just get hurt. They just do get hurt. Not only that, but analyses recently have shown, this is 2015 study, that the unique social structure of hunter-gatherer bands depends on this sex equality, because they don't have residents that where the like the extreme version that Peggy Chan was talking about yesterday, where a woman has to go and join her husband's household and that's it forever. And they have bands that are aggregated by couples who bring their separate relatives together. And the result is, it's actually quite important. The result is that in these different hunting and gathering societies, there tend to be a large percentage of the band. If you look at from the point of view of any one person in the band, a large percentage of the band are people they are not related to, or related to very distantly, or related to through marriage, which would be not related. And that's true in all these different hunting and gathering societies. It's important to understand that I used to think of the hunter-gatherer band as being basically an instance of kin selection and altruism toward kin. But that's not the reality. We now understand that there's unrelated people who are cooperating and engaging in deep reciprocal relationships in these bands. And so that's the one model of the deep social structure, with the couple at the center and the two groups merging or being connected as a result. So what happens after you get an increase in population density, the Yanomamo or partly horticultural, and the men who have killed someone, they're the violent people among the more violent societies. Men who have killed someone have higher reproductive success than men who have not, and that's an unfortunate fact, but it's true. And the option of polygyny exists in many cultures. This is two Mormon families, two men with, this was in the 19th century, not current day Mormons, with two men each with multiple wives and many children. That is an option. And in most human cultures, it is much less common in hunter-gatherers than in others. And as Laura Betzick showed, that she has been the expert on how many children men have, and basically the term is variance or variation in reproductive success. And you can see on the left, in the hunter-gatherers, there's a small difference between male and female variation in reproductive success. So what does that mean? The spread means the spread. In males, there are more males with 0 children than there are females with 0 children. There are more males with high numbers of children than there are females with high numbers of children, because of the obvious physiological differences in reproductive capacity. But not obvious why there should be more males with 0. So it's not just that males have more children. They can't, because they're limited by female choice, as I talked about yesterday. There are men who are getting more access to uteruses. There are men who are losing out completely, and that's the spread of variance. And you can see it's always greater in males than females, but something happens as population density increases, which makes the sex difference much greater. And if you look at the ancient civilizations, as I mentioned yesterday, you have the maximum number of offspring can be in the hundreds for powerful men, and not just the emperor or king, but others. And that's a depiction of something in the Bible that is quite realistic, based on what we know from anthropology about ancient societies and even some modern day or recent African society. As a result of this, you have phenomena like the so-called Genghis Khan chromosome, which I think I might have mentioned yesterday. At any rate, a large proportion of the men in Central Asia today, something like 12%, have a Y chromosome type that can be traced back to the time of Genghis Khan. Nobody can prove that it's Genghis Khan's Y chromosome, but he had many wives and concubines. He had opportunities to use and abuse women among conquered peoples. So did his many sons, so did their sons, and that's an exponentially increasing spread of one type of Y chromosome that shows the power of male genetic legacy in this type of culture. And just so you don't think it's only Asia, it's been shown in different parts of the world, including Ireland, and the ancestor was some sort of important chieftain in early medieval Ireland. But, and I'm not going to go into the whole story of women after all, but the times, they are changing. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the great leader of the women's suffrage movement from the mid-19th century, is not, after all, going to be on the $20 bill, but Harriet Tubman is, and that's emblematic of the advance of women and tremendous, and a lot of things that happened in between the ancient empires and today, but especially in the time between Elizabeth Cady Stanton and us. What's so special about us? Well, that now us refers to the species, and very important to remember, with all our similarity to chimpanzees, we have and bonobos, we have triple the brain size that they have, and the powers of the brain are different. The brain is, it's like colleague Todd Price was an expert on this, says that the human brain is wired differently and running hot. That is, it has specific genetic changes from the ape brain that make it consume and process energy more intensely, and that's part of the difference. It's not just scaled up. And of course, also there are specific adaptations, like the adaptation for language, which E.O. Wilson himself said is a quantum jump in evolution comparable to the assembly of the eukaryotic cell. He's going back to a couple of billion years ago, to the time when bacteria evolved. A more complex type of cell is considered one of the most significant events in the history of life, and so is the evolution of human language. Right, I'll say a little about Kung mother-infant relationships. That's what I was studying, among other things, among the Kung, and they're very close and intense. But they do not exist in isolation. And Sarah Hardy's wonderful book, Mothers and Others, published in 2010, is about the role of cooperation in childcare in different species, and so this is important. She not only shows that humans are uniquely cooperative in childcare among primates, but she also argues that that is the reason humans are uniquely cooperative, period. In other words, not because of group extermination of other groups throughout human evolution that we talked about yesterday, and having to cooperate within the group in order to dominate and get rid of the enemy, but because of the opposite, because of the impossibility of raising a human child without a network of helpers. And the helpers include fathers, older siblings, grandmothers, of course, even grandfathers, and I'm not going to go into it except to say that this could easily be, and I think is a better explanation for the evolution of unique human cooperation than the one that involves warfare. So in human childhood, you have an extraordinary long. This is growth rate, which is dropping and then leveling off, and then this is puberty. In the period between early childhood and puberty, you have a time for putting in a lot of culture, and that's what humans do. Some people call humans the teaching homo docens, and you do not, take my word for it, properly defined, you do not see teaching in any other human primates. You see imitation, which is on the left, but not teaching. And you also don't see collaboration. So this is, I did not choose this photo, but on one of my books, but these two little children are obviously looking at something. We don't know what it is, but this is called shared attention, and it doesn't happen in apes hardly at all. So that's another unique feature of humans. The shared attention makes possible collaborative learning, and that's a big part of the foundation of human cooperation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that is among children who are approximately equal level of knowledge, and that occurs universally in human societies, but also definitely in hunter-gatherers, like the Kung in children's play and in children's subsistence activities. And there's also a flow of culture from older child to younger child, which is often ignored when people think about teaching and cultural reproduction. Now, a word about where ethics come from. I talked to you about him yesterday, and his idea is that there's a built-in structure, including a built-in potential superego, which comes into play through certain interactions with your father and so on. And of course, that is totally untrue. You don't need a father for one thing. You don't need a conflict within the nuclear family. You don't need a nuclear family. And while Freud was listening to his patients on the couch, Jean Piaget was, they were contemporaries, so they overlapped a lot. Piaget was doing his studies of child development, and he was sort of a different mood, as you can see by the expressions on their faces. And he wrote this classic called The Moral Judgment of the Child, in which he watched children playing marbles and then asked them about the rules of the game. Now, what happens in this game, there's no adults in sight, and adults have nothing to do with it. If you talk to the younger children, they know the rules, more or less. You ask them where the rules come from, they just don't know. They're just the rules. If you ask the children a little older, like 7, 8, 9, where do the rules come from, they say, a gentleman made the rules and we follow them. If you ask the 9 to 12-year-olds, they say, we made the rules and we changed them when we want to, as long as we agree on the change. You're looking here, and in this book, he argues that there is a natural emergence of morality in childhood that comes from interactions among children without punishment, without the Bible, without instruction, with an innate sense of fairness that kind of plays out in children's games. So here I'm going to have to try and tread a little lightly because I think the answer to this question is definitely no. And we can talk about it in a few minutes. This is a very good book summarizing the evidence that violence has declined steadily and significantly, not absolutely steadily, but this is not Steve Pinker's idea. He just it's an old idea in sociology going back to the 30s, but he summarizes the current evidence better than anybody, and also has some very interesting ideas about why. So this is data on the deadliness of wars since the 1950s. If you put in World War II, it would be up here somewhere, but that wouldn't be exactly fair. The decline in homicides per 100,000 people in Europe from the year 1300 to the year 1900, and the decline in deaths per conflict in war since the year 2000, before the Common Era. And you just have to trust me. I can't show you all the data, but this is real. And you see the fluctuations there. But over time, there's this decline. You'd never know about it from watching television. You'd hardly know about it from reading the history of the 20th century, that the 20th century was actually the least violent century on record. And the way this works is it's about the denominator. The human population has increased so much that when you do the appropriate statistic, which is you're looking at number of deaths per 100,000 or million of population, there is a steady decline in all forms of violence, both in war and spontaneous violence. And this is here just to show you that that graph does not really extend up and up into the hunting and gathering era. Hunter-gatherers are less violent than non-human primates and less violent than the later forms of society are going to be. This is a decline in marriage, which I believe somebody mentioned as the elder Dr. Bowen's one of his concerns. I am not concerned about the decline in marriage because I think it is a progression from a more coercive type of, system that pushes people into marriage, whether they like it or not, because you couldn't survive unmarried for most of human history. And so I think you're going to get to an equilibrium where the residue of real human inclination to form pair bonds, which I think is strong, will match up with the percentage of people who are married, and the people who don't want to be married won't be married. So that I don't think is a bad thing, and it's certainly liberating to a lot of women, especially. As Peggy Chan was saying about the self combing young women, and maybe the leftover women who managed to resist marriage. It's also a decline in fertility rates. This means changing the traditional extended family into something totally different, whether by coercion, as was done in China, mainland China, or voluntarily, as happened in Italy. This is an Italian family in our traditional conception of it. This is a modern Italian family. This child is likely to remain an only child, given Italy's statistics, and will therefore have no brother or sister. He'll have no nephews and nieces, and his children will have no uncles and aunts, and there'll never be a scene like this unless it's between people who are not related to each other, which of course is what will happen, and what does happen. Also, the kids are all right. You know, yes, the decline of marriage, different forms of marriage. There's all kinds of changes, and there's studies going on all the time of the development of children in different situations. It's possible to create a situation where a child will be deprived and go off track, of course. But this is not that kind of situation, neither of these. And according to the studies, there will be one difference between that child and children who grow up with a mother and father. That's a significant difference, I think, and it is that that child will be less homophobic as an adult. That's the only real difference, and that really, the whole. And I have more respect for Freud than a lot of contemporary thinkers, but the whole thing about how you have to go through this particular family dynamic to end up psychologically normal, total baloney. Okay, so how do we make this transition out of the tangled wing situation? And this is my final set of recommendations. One is reach out across boundaries. You see that in the classic Robbers Cave experiment was done in the 1950s. It was very easy to divide a big group of 11-year-old boys into two groups, call them the Eagles and the Rattlers, pit them against each other in games, reward them for winning, and they hated each other within a matter of a couple of weeks, and stole from each other and did all sorts of nasty things. But on the other side, they were brought back together and made to do a task that was good for everybody. And here's the change that took place. This is the percentage of boys who had a best friend in the other group, and this is the percentage who said that they did during the period of separation and competition. And this is after the period of reconciliation. So that reaching out works even in long-established group conflicts, as I'll show you in the next slide. I visited a school in Jerusalem, attended by the daughter of a Jewish friend of mine. This is an Arab-Jewish school. Half the classes are in Arabic, half are in Hebrew. The children, everything is in both languages. The children are completely conversant in both languages, and this is one of the displays. Yesh makom l'kulam. I don't know how to read the Arabic, but it means in both languages this is a place for everyone, and this is each child made a picture like this, and it illustrates the statement, what fun to have lots of friends. So that is definitely something we need to work on. We also need to educate girls and feminize power, and that's what my last book's about. And this is Malala Yousafzai in the news in August of 15 because she made high grades on her school exams. By that time, she had already won the Nobel Peace Prize and was engaged in a worldwide operation to encourage the education of girls. And these are children in a Central American country that she's visiting and helping. The feminization of power is happening. I know that it's not happening fast enough for the sake of those who want to see equality. We're not near that yet, but I think we're in a relentless positive trend, and I do not see the possibility of really reversing that trend, except very briefly and locally. So this is a cute thing. I don't necessarily think it has to end that way. You know, I can more easily favor a complementarity and cooperation over there, as Elizabeth Cady Stanton explicitly proposed in 1869. Because men and women are different and are the complement of each other, that's why they have to share in the powers of government, and not because they're the same. And prepare for the bottleneck. So here's what I'm going to say. All those bad things that I listed, and this is really the last point, the bad things that I listed yesterday are in our future up to a point. But we have a bottleneck to get through with population increase. And because of the negative side of human nature, we're going to see a lot of bad consequences while the population continues to increase. And that is going to stop sometime in the second half of this century. And then, if the pattern that has occurred in Italy and Thailand and China and everywhere in the world that has industrialized and introduced birth control, if that pattern obtains at a worldwide level, and there's every reason to expect that, the human population will start to go down. It will not top off and stay there. It will start to go down as life gets better for more people and women have more control over their reproduction. And it will take some time, and it will be difficult because of the populations being top-heavy with old people. But the population will go down to a level that is compatible with the planet surviving quite nicely. Thank you. It might take 100 years or 200 years, but I'm pretty sure the demographers will tell you that that will happen. Just have to get through this really bad period with mass extinction, wars over fresh water and energy, and horrible pollution and rape of the land, as we heard about yesterday. But I think it's going to be a hard time. But the good news is that it's temporary, and if we can get through it, we'll be in a much better situation. And the reason I think we can get through it is this, because despite our commonalities with non-human animals, we have something very special, and we have the power to overcome biology if we understand it, but nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. So thank you. I'm sorry for speaking so long, but we have a couple of minutes for questions before, or we.
Dr. Konner, I was intrigued with your answer to the question of are we in a regression? And I was just wondering if instead of looking at violence, the incidence of violence, which is certainly one indicator of regression, if we look at the growing disharmony between the human and nature itself, whether it's climate change or fisheries, exhaustion, soil, if that were the marker of regression, would you still say that we're not in a period of regression?
So that's a great question. I was hoping that those of you who are more knowledgeable about Bowen's ideas about regression, societal regression, than me would have some interesting challenges to make. So here's how I think about that. First of all, in a way, yes, obviously we are in conflict with the environment, and we're going to be more in conflict with the environment over the next, let's say, 30 to 50 years at least, if not more. I mean, we're going to have 9 or 10 billion people on the planet for a while, for several generations. That's not going to be good. And the even worse than the number is, people do calculations, smart people do calculations, and they show, well, the planet can generate enough wheat and barley and so on to feed rice to feed 10 billion mouths, but that's not the point. The point is the rising aspirations of everyone in the world, and if everyone, nobody thinks the planet could sustain even the simplest Western lifestyle for everyone. And so it's going to be hard and bad. But I don't see that as a result of societal regression. I see that as a result of what might be called societal inertia. That is, we just have to do a U-turn in the way we think about our relationship to the environment. And I'm guessing that everybody in this room and their children and grandchildren have done the U-turn. That is, instead of thinking the environment, as I said yesterday, instead of thinking that the environment is dangerous and something that we need to dominate and control in order to survive, we have started to think of the environment as something that we have to take care of, the whole world, as if it were a family farm. That is not a transition that's going to be made overnight, and a lot of people still don't accept the idea that there's something dangerous in the offing if we go on with the old plan. So I would say it didn't require a regression for us to get into this really dangerous situation with the environment. It just required that we keep on being mostly the way we were, and it can only be solved by enough people reversing course on that relationship. I don't think that there's a downward trend in people's caring about the environment. I think it's the other way, and so I don't see how that can be a regression. It's an increasingly dangerous situation because of our numbers and the increase in our numbers. But that's just more of the same, and I don't think it represents a decline in our attitudes about the environment.
So you would say then that the long-term trend is hopeful in that there are more people becoming aware of the problem and interested in trying to address it.
Yes,
over
in
time,
a way, yes.
that will shift the balance and will move toward a more responsible stewardship of the planet.
Yes, I would endorse that statement.
Okay.
Definitely. And by the way, at least two of my kids get enraged when I say stuff like this, because they are so sure that the end of the world is coming, and they think that I'm minimizing it. I'm not minimizing it. I just don't think it's going to be the end of the world. I think it could be a really hard time if we don't get the right kind of people in leadership positions throughout the world.
Okay. Thanks.
Yes.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Konner. I've just put something together in my head, and I'm wondering if you could speak to it. So I know that when fathers take parent, that in the act of looking at the infant, there is oxytocin is evoked in them. So I'm now connecting what you're talking about, cooperation. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. I mean, I only know a tiny little bit about that, but I just thought, yes, okay, there's a chemical reaction in the male in the act of care giving that otherwise wouldn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's a guy at Emory called Larry Young who's done a lot of the fundamental research on the genes that govern this fathering behavior through oxytocin receptor expression. And he says that sometimes he'll give a lecture and a young woman will come up and ask him for something that she can put in her boyfriend's beer or orange juice that will make him commit. That's not in the offing anytime soon, although these oxytocin experiments make both men and women more cooperative and trusting in many situations. Not always a good thing to be more trusting, obviously, but I mean, if you're asking whether there could be a pharmacological solution to the problems of aggression and conflict, you'd have to get everybody to take it. You know, everybody would be, especially men, would have to be walking around with a spray bottle of oxytocin in their pockets. And
It was more about the reciprocity and how cooperation is evoked in the
Yeah.
act of care giving, and also there's a chemical reaction. Yeah.
yeah, well, when men become fathers, they have a decline in testosterone. One of my friends and younger colleagues, former students, Jenny Mascaro, showed that there's a decline in testicle size when men become fathers. I hope that doesn't ward off too many young men from becoming fathers, but you can see why it would make sense. And there's also an increase in oxytocin in some studies. I just don't. I mean, ever since high school, I've been trying to think about human behavior in partly biological terms. I can't think about it any other way. So when I put all these things together, that's when it makes sense to me. Does it provide a formula for change? Yes and no. I mean, certainly it's good to know that human nature has deeply ingrained and biologically specifiable, neurologically specifiable tendencies that include aggression and love, include trust and conflict and anxiety and driven sexuality and tenderness. All of that is biologically specifiable, and not always easy to figure out how that helps us. In fact, there was an exchange between me and Victoria yesterday about her biological markers in her study, and you know, it's part of the the information that you can use to think about how systems work, and if the systems are made up of people and the people are made up of molecules, well, you want to know something about how people function at molecular level. I think that the practical things are going to be behavioral. I hope we're not going to get into eugenics and trying to insert genes into the human line to alter the course of evolution. Encouraging contact between outgroups is one thing that I meant. I just mentioned a few things, but that's proven to work if you can do it. And a lot of past advances have come from that. Everyone was, or many people were up in arms when President Truman integrated the armed forces by fiat. It's the only organization that could be integrated by fiat, by one person's order. And everybody predicted chaos, and there was no chaos. It were just pioneering achievements in the integration process, which then gradually, slowly filtered into the rest of society, where it couldn't be done by fiat. The education of girls is really golden in the developing world, especially. So it has consequences for everything that you want to improve in those countries. It reduces family size. She has fewer children. They're healthier. They are better educated. She makes more money in her lifetime. Her husband is healthier. and she has more control over her sexuality and is less likely to be abused by whatever man she's with. No better way to spend a development dollar than to educate a girl.
Thank you.
Even though there's a time lag. I mean, obviously, you may have to wait 20 years to see all the results, but that's not very long to an anthropologist. Mercy.
Good morning. Yes, my name is Mercy Burton Russell, and first I want to thank you for just such a lovely presentation and review of this literature, which is I've had some exposure to.
Thank you.
There are two things. I wanted to share a quote that I recently heard from Dr. Bowen on a tape. So I'll start with that so I don't forget, because my question, I want to just sort of think a little bit about this concept of societal regression, because I've been struggling with it in a way. So that this I heard Dr. Bowen's. I was reviewing some conference tapes that he had done. I think the year before he died, and this really stood out to me this summer. And he said something to this effect: "Man does best when his back is up against the wall." Sort of, I think, in the context of looking at declining indicators in society. This would have been in the 80s, the late 80s. When that time comes, there will be a great loss of population. Those who survive will be those who can live in cooperation with nature. And just your bottleneck metaphor just really reminded me that that's how he expressed his view of the future also. More like getting through the eye of a needle, I think, was what he But I think he saw that it was possible, and that there would be, as you also said, that there would be a lot of loss of life as we know it in the process, but that the survival of the species was possible also. In terms of the concept of societal regression, I just completed a doctorate in the social sciences. So I was...
Congratulations.
Thank you. I put Bowen theory forward a number of times and then just decided it wasn't worth my life energy to kind of explain or teach my professors about Bowen theory. So I was exposed to some, sociological theory. And one theory that I really found very interesting and useful was that of institutional theory. And one of my sort of problems with Bowen's concept of societal regression is that, without a careful review of what he's said and written about it, that he's talking about the society as if it's one group and one family. My understanding is that progression and regression in the multi-generational family takes place in branches of the family, and that there's actually can be a reciprocity, so that one sibling may have children whose level of differentiation regresses over the generations. So goes from a higher level of differentiation to a lower and a lower and a lower one. And at the same time, there can be a cousin or a sibling whose children actually become more differentiated than their parents, and then there's progression. So, and in my view, this is always happening in a balance, so that if you looked at this multi-generational family over 10 generations, you'd see, ribbons of progression and regression. And I'm not aware of whether Bowen ever used the levels in a numerical fashion of differentiation for groups, or even for families. My understanding is that it was really only on the level of the individual. So an individual has a differentiational level, and then you could average it. You could average the numbers for a family, but I didn't ever hear him do that. So this is, I'm speaking not only to you, but to my colleagues. So when we look at the future, I think it's easy to kind of go back and forth and say, well, we're either in a regression and at the same time, there are all these positive indicators too. And part of what I've been doing, just a couple other thoughts, and then I have a question for you too. So we live in this American society, and if we look at the leadership in our government, it's not hard to see indicators of regression and much higher degrees of emotionality expressed and exchanged among those people who are visible through our media, right? Many of us aren't visible. But how much of us really have a view of the globe, of global populations? A lot of the data that you presented, or that Pinker presents, is not based on the United States of America. He's looking at trends worldwide, and I personally don't get much information about that in normal sources. I'd really have to be a scholar to see that, or read these challenging books that not a lot of people have exposure to even see that good things are happening. So that leads to my question of when you're talking about group selection, how are those groups defined? Are they defined as groups of people living in one locale? Are they defined as, I applied the institutional theory to occupations. Would they be described as, professionals and versus laborers versus business executives? I mean, there's so many ways to look at groups and then to evaluate either where selection is taking place or how it's taking place.
So, Mercy, there's a lot in your, I think, 3 questions, and
Okay.
I don't know if I can do justice to all of it, but starting with the last, I liked another sociologist, I think it was Turnus, had this concept of Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, community and society. So with a community like the ones that Doug Bowen was talking about yesterday, and I was talking about one of them today, it's easier to see them as contained, and people have less specialized roles than in a larger scale society. And you can see it as one group, although these are, especially among hunter-gatherers, but in all societies, these are not really reified groups with strong boundaries. In most cases, right. They're fluid at the boundaries. They're changing, especially in hunter-gatherers, and identity is somewhat fluid in who you identify with, which is one of the reasons why it's hard for me to believe the model that says, well, there was a lot of warfare in our past in the hunting and gathering era, and groups were very coherent and wiped each other out, and the cooperative ones did better. In a complex society, there are all these cross-cutting institutions and roles, and one person is playing a lot of different roles in different groups. One role in a church or a mosque, and the same person, a different role at work. It might be a subordinate or executive role, another role in friendships, another role in the PTA, another role at parties. There are just so many different definable groups that coalesce for certain purposes. It's interesting. It just makes me think of the decline of unions in the United States over the last few decades. Unions were very important group organizations and effective in making certain advancements, and partly because those advances happened and the unions as groups were successful, they didn't need to be as coherent and forceful and separate as they once did, perhaps. Although I still believe they have a role. I'm sorry. Just give me a hint about what you started with at the beginning.
Well, I think I started with Dr. Bowen's quote, which was similar to what you had said in terms of the bottleneck.
About societal regression and
well, I was talking about my diffiety with thinking of society as one unit. That if
yes,
I compared it to a multi-generational family.
You made me think of North and South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Here you have two peoples that are, in a sense, part of one culture or were, and just because of conditions that were set up differently in these two adjacent places, had what I would call societal progression on one side of the border and severe societal regression on the other side. And I think you do that kind of comparison maybe with Thailand and Burma until recently, and you do that with a lot of different situations in the world. So yes, I think it would work above the level of the family.
My current strategy for dealing with the media and the excitement that it's portrayed is really just to look. I call it looking for the light. I mean, just keeping my attention on where I see progression. Right? I mean, you can't escape the fact that regression is there. So,
well, I think
what's
I think
different if I look for it or if I look toward it? So,
the old saying, think globally, act locally, is very helpful. Very few of us can really act globally. But it's good to step back the way Pinker does. And by the way, there are declines in violence in the United States too. You never know it from watching the news because dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. And nobody, everybody wants to know about the volcano that's erupting, not the volcano that's quiescent. So we see it all the time, and it's not an accurate depiction of the longer term trends. And I'm not saying that the decline is perfectly smooth. There are changes, but if you back up and look at a longer time frame and a bigger picture, I'm saying it can be very encouraging. And then you can go back to work on the local level to fix the things that might be going in the wrong direction somewhere for some time, and that's how I think about it, and just spread the gospel of science, spread the word about clear thinking and also about cooperation among nations. I mean, we might be entering a phase in which we're going backwards on that. We might be entering a phase in which we're going backwards on the number of democracies in the world. I just see the bigger trends going in the right direction, and I see a need to work to, if we're getting out of whack and getting into regression to some degree, to work to get the regression back. Oh, and the other thing, I'm sorry, but the other thing is about the needle, the eye of the needle, the bottleneck. So Dr. Bowen's, what I would call cataclysmic optimism is not something that I would share. Talking about the senior Dr. Bowen, the idea that there would be the kind of crisis that would result in massive deaths and throughout the world, and that the people who survive would be the ones who are more willing to take care of nature. First of all, it's like Yogi Berra said, it's very difficult to make predictions, especially about the future. And the other thing about that is I could see the opposite scenario. First of all, I mean, you're talking about a gigantic human cost on a level that's probably unprecedented in human history. And second of all, what I know about human nature, yeah, maybe back is to the wall phenomenon makes you all cooperate and take care of nature better at that point. But maybe it just allows the worst people to survive, the way it has in so many situations throughout history. I would not be optimistic about the results of a crisis, worldwide crisis like that. I would be in favor of avoiding it at pretty much all
Connor,
costs.
would I,
Right?
can
But-
I ask you for perhaps to take one more question before we
Yeah.
break?
Sure.
Would you be able to do that? I think then that'll put us, we will have to do the break.
I just think this is a wonderful conversation, that
Thank you.
regression has been
I do
a
too.
topic of conversation, and I know I've put a lot of thinking into, how do we be careful as Bowen thinkers to not find what we think we're looking for. That is, Dr. Bowen made a statement in the 70s about societal regression. And how do we not just keep looking for it, but how do we find criteria by which we measure it and think about it that, that's realistic. And I think that's where Pinker's book is an interesting contribution. I mean, I think there's other things out there that also measure success in education and health, and so how do we put that together, with some sort of levels of how we would estimate regression. I mean, how do you look at Somalia as a failed state, and then what's happening in the United States right now? How do you measure that? But what I wanted to ask you about in terms of your ideas about the optimistic ideas is, I thought Elizabeth Kolbert's book, The Sixth Extinction, was very interesting, and I think it is a hypothesis
I
that,
haven't read it, but I've heard of
well,
it.
it's shared by many scientists that the human will produce the sixth extinction.
Yes.
And I was just
I
curious
completely
where
agree
you put
with
that
yeah.
into the equation.
It is happening right now, and is likely to continue. And it's a mass extinction caused by human actions, including climate change and habitat destruction, and we're just seeing. It's hard to imagine something on the scale of the extinction of the dinosaurs and a lot of other species at that time, but that actually didn't happen overnight. That resulted from the asteroid impact caused climate change, and then 100,000 years or something, there was gradual extinction of species. Our mass extinction that we're causing right now is going faster, and it's.
So maybe in 50 years the population will be down, but there won't be anybody to
That's
anything
right.
else to
That's right, but
hang
but-
out with.
And I don't take that lightly, but there are a lot of scientists working on reconstructing DNA of extinct species, on creating habitats where revived extinct species could actually, I mean, it's Jurassic Park, but with a benign, aspect. I'm not one of the people who thinks human ingenuity can solve all problems. That's, but that's more for the climate deniers. But it can solve problems and help a lot. So I'm encouraged. There's progress in solar energy science. There's progress in desalination science. There's these specific areas where there's progress in birth control, progress in cheap disease surveillance for the developing world. If you look at the health statistics, you mentioned them, Ann, the mortality, infant mortality, maternal mortality, longevity statistics, worldwide or in the developing world as a whole, it is an amazing success story, absolutely astounding, and it helps create a bigger population, but eventually it creates a culture in which people have fewer children because they think their children are going to survive, and so it's not a simple thing. But I see tremendous progress, and I also don't any longer see any point in pessimism. I mean, you have to have a realistic eye and look at things for what they are. But if you are going to be pessimistic to the point of not being able to act, that's totally maladaptive to me.
Dr. Konner, you're still going to end on the positive, a little bit on the positive.
Okay, so I'll tell you a story about one time I was talking to Bill Foege, who was head of the CDC in the 80s, who became the number one medical person at the Carter Center, then became the number one medical public health person at the Gates Foundation, and he has, I can't even begin to describe how much good this man has done in the world. And one evening after dinner, I asked him, you see everything that's wrong with the world, and you grapple with it up close, and how can you be so optimistic all the time? And he said, how can you not be?
Well, listen, thank you. This was some morning. That's right.